So, hello everyone, and welcome to our first event of fall 2021. Today we are honored to host Zakaria Hassani. Mr. Hassani, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today. So thank you a lot for joining. Can you briefly introduce yourself and give a bit of a background of who you are?
Thank you very much, Alexander, for having me. It's a pleasure for me as well. And I hope that the discussion that we're going to have today, it could be of any sort of help and assist, and the participant could find it useful. My name is Zakaria Hassani. I'm from Maidan Wardak of Afghanistan. I have 30 years old. I finished the journalism faculty in Herat University back in 2014. And shortly after I finished or graduated from university, I joined One TV, which was one of the leading TV channels of Afghanistan. I worked there as a journalist, as a reporter, and then executive news producer for more than three years. Then I started working as a freelancer, and after a few months, I started working for the Radio France International up to a week before Kabul and Afghanistan fell to Taliban. And now it's about 2 months that I left Afghanistan, and I'm living with my family in Paris, in France.
All right, great. So, Mr. Hassani, can you talk about the day the Afghan government collapsed and the Taliban took over, and how you experienced it as a journalist being stationed in Kabul at that time?
Well, before, everything starts, I think actually before maybe 2 months or weeks before that Kabul fell to Taliban. I remember when I was in Afghanistan, I was reporting about the Taliban violence and the Taliban attacks that they were gaining grounds every day. So I was reporting on that for the organization that I was working for, and contrary to their agreement with the United States that they are not allowed to attack the major capital cities, this time, besides collapsing the districts and across Afghanistan, they started their violence. They started their attacks on major provincial capital as well. So, for example, they started to collapse and to fill or to attack some of the provincial capital in the south of Afghanistan. Then they moved on to the north part of Afghanistan, and then to the west of Afghanistan, and finally that they made their way to the Kabul. So I remember that the first provincial capital that they started attacking on that, I talked with some local journalists about the war and about how everything happened in there, for example, in south of Afghanistan, and how Taliban could attack a provincial capital and could capture that. They told me that, shared some interesting details and information. They said that unfortunately there wasn't any willing, there wasn't any ambition to fight the Taliban. So that was, the main reason behind that why provincial capitals and why, the provinces are falling one after another one. So the details and the information that I received from the local journalists were somehow not, what I actually was searching for. So that's why I started, connecting and contacting my sources, talking to some army or military officials, generals, to some soldiers that back in Afghanistan. I interviewed them for my reports, for the documentaries. They also, shared something very close to the information that the local journalists shared with me. They said that we are not allowed, by our generals, by the leadership, to fight the Taliban. Even some of them told me that there are, only few Taliban fighters that they come to a district, they come to a provincial capital, they, fill the district or or collapse the provincial capital. But the problem is that we are not allowed. Even some of them were crying that about what is going to happen in Afghanistan and what was actually happening in that moment. So I remember when when MazarSharif, when the Taliban attacked MazarSharif in the north of Afghanistan, I talked with a female local district governor, Salima Mazari, and I asked her the same question, that how is the morale of Afghan army, and how you could fight the Taliban, and how and why. I also asked about her opinion about why other districts are falling so, quickly without any fighting. So she told me that there is not enough support from the Kabul, from the presidential palace, from the national security, and from the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Interior, ministers actually, and the leadership, that every day they have discussion meetings in the National Security Council. So they told me that first of all there isn't enough support, and then the Taliban conducted some sort of propaganda to shatter and to destroy the army's morale. So these two factors was very actually very strong reasons behind why every districts were falling to the Taliban. And she told me that when you don't have moral, or when you lose your morals, so it's very difficult to keep the soldiers together and to tell them to fight an enemy, which you see and you witness that every day they're gaining ground, and they fell or collapse one province after another. So the scenario just was going like this until they attacked the last major city before Kabul, which was MazarSharif. And we thought that at least MazarSharif, there were many strong men there, like General Dostum, who was a former vice president and a very powerful jihadi leader in the north of Afghanistan. Atta Muhammad Noor was also, he was also one of the strongest men in the north of Afghanistan. They had a sort of local empire in the north of Afghanistan, and we thought that at least these two men, along with their fighters, along with their army, at least they can resist the Taliban, and they can fight the Taliban for a few weeks, as we witnessed that Ismail Khan in the west of Afghanistan, in Herat city, they resisted for almost 20 or 21 days. So the day that the Taliban started their offensive on MazarSharif, I was in Kabul. I was closely monitoring the situation. The fighting started early in the morning, and till I think 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, everything finished. The whole city fell to Taliban. All those strong men alongside of the MPs, and they all left the country, went to the Uzbekistan border. Some of them could make it and could cross the border, some others couldn't. They felt the Uzbek authorities refused to allow them inside their territory. So after that, the MazarSharif fall to Taliban, I started, to be a little bit worried. Though I was worried in the past days as well, but it was personal. As a journalist, as an outspoken journalist who always in the past used to report the Taliban's atrocities, the Taliban's war crimes. And in 2015, when the first time Taliban collapsed Kunduz city in the north of Afghanistan, I reported on that, and since then they put my name on their hit list, on their military commission's hit list. So I was one of those few journalists that, if in terms of a Taliban takeover, I was definitely on their list, and they could come to eliminate me. So the day that it was, MazarSharif fall to Taliban, so it was around midnight. It was around 6 or 7 o'clock p.m. And I started contacting a few of my friends. They were also journalists, and we agreed to see each other tomorrow. The day after the fall of the MazarSharif. So we at 10 o'clock on 18th of August, on 15th of August at 10 o'clock, we gathered in the middle of the city, in the center of the city, and try to meet each other and discuss the current situation. That what is the current situation like? What will happen, and what is that we should take as a journalist, and as journalists that actually who are on the Taliban's hit list, and if we could do something. But the time that I arrived in in that place that we were supposed to meet each other, I received some calls from my parents that there are rumors in west of the Kabul city that Taliban have entered the city. Do you heard anything or not? And at the same time, after a few minutes, I received a call from the French embassy as well, because 2 days ago I applied for the French visa because of what happened in Afghanistan. So I received a call from the French embassy as well. They told me to bring my documents in order to issue me and my family visas. So when I left the place and I started going toward my house, I witnessed that there is a very strange and unprecedented traffic jam all over the city. That you can, all the streets were packed with cars, and you cannot, you couldn't, go from one destination to another destination by using the car. So that's why I used car for some streets, and then I started to run to get myself to my home. So when I arrived at Polisokta, it's a square which is about a kilometer far from my house. I witnessed that the people were panic, and they were leaving the western part of Kabul, and they are running, fleeing from that area, and they are running toward the center of the city. I asked some of them that what happened, why are you running away? They told me that we have heard the Taliban have entered Kabul and they are in Kalai now. Kalai now is the start of west of Kabul, which we call it Barchi. Barchi is an area that which is home to Shiite and Hazara community of Afghanistan. Mostly in western, the Hazaras are living in the western part of Afghanistan, western part of Kabul city. So when I heard and what I witnessed, I started to run, to run to my house, and I just got my passport, my IDs, and told my wife that you follow me and I will go to the French embassy. I got also my bicycle and I'm going to the French embassy, and you should also come with with our daughter. So when I left my house, I saw my mom, in front of the door. She was crying that what you gonna do now? Because she knew that I'm on the hit list of the Taliban group. So she cried, and she said that what do you want to do? And I said, I'm going to my uncle's house in the eastern part of the city, because I didn't know that I'm going to get the visa on the same day. So I said that I'm going to my uncle's house, and I told them to come to my uncle's house as well. Without that, I said goodbye to my mom. I left my house and came to the French embassy. And by the time that I arrived at the French embassy, the door was closed, and the French embassy authorities told me, they sent me a message, and then they called me that unfortunately the Taliban are already in the city, so we cannot help you, and you have to find some place to hide. So the way on the streets, that actually the day that I left my house and come to the French embassy, I saw no police officer, no military, I saw nothing, no one was there actually, on that day. And it was somehow, we knew that the Taliban gonna come, but there isn't any security forces. With what I heard in the west of city, that the Taliban already entered the city, and I suppose that there should be some military in the center of the city, or they have to come to the west of the city to defend the city. But unlike what I thought on that moment, I didn't see anyone. I didn't see any police. That back in the normal days, there were lots of police in the checkpoints in every corner of the city. But on that day, I saw no one. Even the diplomatic areas were empty, and there wasn't any security, any guards. So it signaled somehow that today the Kabul will definitely fall to Taliban, and there has been some news that the officials might know about it, but we were not aware of that. So that's why I got to the French embassy, and I faced, with that message of the French embassy authorities, that we have left the embassy. We are now in the Kabul airport, and we're gonna leave Kabul. So you have to find a place. Then we wait for a while, and I told my wife that you should not come to the French embassy because no one is here. but unfortunately, or maybe we should say fortunately, she didn't pick up. Maybe because there was lots of people, lots of noise in the streets, and she was also coming by her foot because there wasn't any car at all. So after 2 hours that they arrived, the Taliban also issued a statement. It was already 4 o'clock, 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They issued a statement and said that we are not willing to enter Kabul city militarily. So there are negotiations underway in order to let us come to the Kabul city and enter Kabul city to officially, take over of the capital and take the power. So this bought us some time and caused that the French authority come back to the French embassy, and they also let us in. And everything starts from here. We spent 3 days at the French embassy with other families, with other people who worked with the French government, or some political figures and some other journalists whose lives were in danger, and the Taliban were a threat to them. So we all stayed for 3 days at the French embassy, because every night that we tried to leave the embassy to the airport, I think there was a sort of problem that when we tried to leave the embassy, we came out of the rooms, and we stayed for a few minutes, and even for an hour at the yard of or at the campus of the French embassy. Then again, they told us that we go back to your rooms because we are not going to make it today or tonight. So 3 days passed like this, and finally, I think they they talked with the Taliban officials, and they reached a sort of agreement. And then on August 17, early in the morning, around midnight, we left the French embassy, and there was some cars. They escorted us to the airport, and from the French embassy to the airport, I witnessed lots of Taliban fighters in the streets. They were, on the police rangers, on the army rangers. They were, moving, marching from one direction to another direction. And there were, and in our way from the French embassy to the airport, we also witnessed that a woman in the midnight, they come in front of our car and begging for letting us in, because they knew that because there was some other cars as well, some French, some embassy cars, and they knew that they are with the foreigners and they are heading to the airport. So this is a way that they can get out of the country and get out of the city. So they were begging to let us in, but it wasn't in our hands. It was the French authorities that they made the decision, and they made the decision to let anyone or not. So when we came, so we actually could make it to the French, to the airport. We stayed for a few hours there, and early in the morning we left the airport to the UAE, and to another French French airbase in the UAE. And after spending 4 or 5 hours there, we headed to Paris. But during the 3 days, everything happened. All those shocking incident that the world witnessed, that the world saw, very short videos of that, of what happened in the airport in Kabul airport, happened during these 3 days that we spent at the French embassy. There were thousands of people attacked the airport. They tried to get out of the country. They even I have heard that some of them could make it to the military airplanes, and they could depart Kabul. So some even could do this without having a single document that proves that they work with the United States, they work with any Western government. So this, somehow is spread among the ordinary people, and that is why every day we witness that more and more people are attacking and coming or heading toward the Kabul airport in order to find a way and to have, or to somehow see if the chance is on their side and they can leave Kabul. One of my closest friends, who was also a journalist, he also left Kabul, left his house and moved to the Kabul airport with his brother. I also know his brother as well. We used to meet each other because I used to go to their house and he used to come to my house. We were like brothers, you know. He was very kind to me. He was the closest one, the closest friend that I had in Kabul. And whenever I needed someone to be with me, and he was the only one, and he was the first one that would say yes to this and would come to me. So he also moved and went to the Kabul airport, but unfortunately, it was on I think on 26th of August that it was around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock p.m. local time that they were there and they were waiting for a chance to get into the Kabul airport. That those deadly explosions, two back-to-back explosions occurred, and both of them lost their lives. And when I heard this through our friends, I couldn't believe this because with all those memories come and just march in front of my eyes, and I didn't know that this is a fact and this is the reality. So I refused to believe this. So I started contacting everyone in Kabul, contacting our fellow journalists, and asked them if they know what happened to Ali Reza Ahmadi, my friend, and if I have heard some news, if it's correct or not. So we had a group, a messenger, a group actually on Messenger, and I shared the news with the other journalists. I think there were about 50 to 100 journalists there, and I asked them if they know, if they have any update about Ali Reza Ahmadi, and none of them actually knew that. So they started investigation. They started searching for Ali Reza Ahmadi, and one day later, they sent me a message that, yeah, unfortunately, what you heard about Ali Reza Ahmadi is correct. It is the reality. He unfortunately lost his life, and it was shattered. You recognize him. So I contacted his brother as well. But his brother, who was accompanying him, his body was lost, and his family could find him. Could find him 15 days later. And they confirmed me that unfortunately both of them lost their lives. So this was, these was the shocking moments that I personally experienced, and we have still friends there in Kabul, in other parts of Afghanistan, that they are exposed to threats, and Taliban are definitely a threat to them because they have faced some threats from the Taliban back in the past weeks and the past months or years. But unfortunately, we don't have any leverage. We don't have. It's not in our ability to help them. While we know that we should help them, because if we don't do that, I'm sure that I will lose more friends like Al Reza Ahmadi and his brother. So yeah, right now we are in Kabul. We are in Paris. But back in Kabul, I have my parents there. I have my friends there. I have my colleagues there. So they're all those very dearest persons that I left behind. I left behind my country. I left behind my house, my life, my subject, everything that I invested during these past 20 years. The past 20 years provided the new generation of Afghanistan a sort of opportunity. They gave us a relatively, democracy, a relatively, opportunity that we could, invest on ourselves and work on ourselves and prepare ourselves for the future that Afghanistan could somehow, count on us. But shocking things happened in the past weeks, in the past months. Shocking things happens that none of us actually, we were expecting that. I personally, was surprised that how quickly Afghanistan and how quickly Kabul city fell to Taliban. When I was in Kabul and I heard about that MazarSharif fell to Taliban, I thought that at least Kabul might have time for a week more max. But just a day after Kabul, Kabul also fell to Taliban, and yeah, here we were. We find ourselves in a city that is under the attack of the Taliban, and we fought with the Taliban for years. We reported their atrocities, we reported their war crimes, and we reported about their suicide attacks that shattered, destroyed families and killed lots of innocent people. So of course they had they had things to do, or somehow they had some some personal stuff that they should somehow come to us and ask about these things. On the same day that I forgot to mention this, on the same day that Kabul fell to Taliban, Twitter account related to the Taliban, they sent me a message on my WhatsApp account as well and said that, okay, we have been we have been somehow monitoring your Twitter account for years, and you are one of those journalists who are working for the Westerners, who are working for foreign countries, and now that we are heading to Kabul, we know what to do with it. So this was the last message and the last thread that I received from a Taliban-related Twitter account. Though I have been bullied by the Taliban Twitter account, by the Taliban social media accounts in the past days, in the past years as well. For example, on Facebook, on Twitter, whenever I was tweeting about Taliban, they came and they sent me a message, or they replied and they labeled me with agents, with infidel, non-believer journalists, with a journalist who don't believe to those norms that the journalism community is stuck to. So these were the labels that constantly used by the Taliban, by the Taliban Twitter accounts or Facebook accounts or social media accounts against me. And I have been, I was dealing and I was grappling with these things during my career in Afghanistan. So the question that how Afghanistan fell so quickly to the Taliban, it is, I should say, and I should confess that it's still a question for me as well, because I cannot believe that the army that we had, the army that we built through the past 20 years, could fail so quickly to some Talibans who are on their motorbikes, and they don't have that much strong supporters, regional supporters, except some countries that the Afghan government always blamed and always, asked them to stop supporting the Taliban. But it is still a question, and if you consider what the details and the information that the local journalists and the military officials shared with me, I, ending up in, putting all the blames and or somehow accusing the leadership clique, which is President Ashraf Ghani, Hamdullah Mohib, the national security advisor, and the other guy who was in charge of, was head of the presidential administrative. They are, the three people who monopolized the power, who somehow sidelined all the other key officials or strong men who had a very powerful rule in Afghanistan, and they could fight the Taliban. They fight the first time that the Taliban captured Afghanistan, and they fight against them. They had so enough power, but they worked to sideline them. They worked to monopolize the power, and on the day that Afghanistan fell to Taliban, or better to say, in the previous months, that everything started so quickly that the Afghanistan fell to Taliban. These three people were the only one who were on charge of controlling the power in Afghanistan. Other people had with no power, and they had no influence in forming the future of Afghanistan. So this is still a question that I personally don't have a response, an answer for that, and I think we have to wait and we have to see what else will come next. And for example, we know that some officials already started talking about how things happen, but I think they are still grappling with their own lives. So once they settle, I think there will be more information that will come out about how Kabul fell. Yeah, there are also some information about the day that President Ashraf Ghani fled Afghanistan. For example, I have a friend, a journalist friend, who has a very close ties with the journalist bodyguards, which we call it TPS. So one of them, just shared their stories that the day that Ashraf Ghani fled the country, he had lots of, luggage. He had lots of money, and when they tried to leave the presidential palace, there was lots of people in the helicopters, and also lots of staffs and luggage. So they decide to put some of the money back on the ground, and they leave the presidential palace then. So when they do so, there were lots of millions of euros and dollars on the ground, and when they leave, the PPS soldiers that remain on the ground, they start stealing the money, and so they get all the money which belong to the people of Afghanistan. And if it's correct, then it's really a shame, and President Ashraf Ghani himself should have a response for this. Though he has denied this in a video message that a few days after he fled Afghanistan and went to UAE, he recorded a video and said that whatever you hear about the stealing money is not accurate, and it's incorrect.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hassani. That was really insightful and moving. Thank you a lot. I suggest now that we open the discussion for everybody. So Olivia, if you would please share the slides again and open the Q&A session.
All right, so now it's time for the question and answers portion, and I think it's really rare to be able to speak to a person who is so knowledgeable about something like this, and who can also bring you not just sort of the cold hard facts of the situation from a political perspective, but can also enlighten you to some of the human cost events like this happening. And I know, like me, Alexandra, and Anna all have questions, so I think first we're going to offer this up to our guests. So if you have a question you would like to ask Mr. Hassani, you can raise your hand, and then Alexandra, I think, will call on you, and then you can just offer your question.
I think there has been a slight misunderstanding. So everybody who is participating from the audience can now pose all questions that you might have with regards to Mr. Hassani and the situation in Afghanistan. So please, everyone who is participating, feel free to raise your hand and ask. So the floor is all yours.
Oh, Ralph Schulheimer?
Okay, our professor, Ralph Schulheimer, is asking what was the effect of the US retreat on the morale of Afghan troops, because he can't talk at the moment, so he just sent it in the chat. Mr. Hassani, did you understand the question?
Yes, I got the question.
Perfect.
So first of all, I thank him for sharing these questions with all. I think if I come back to this question, I can say that everything is solved with this question, with the US involvement in negotiation with the Taliban. Back in 2019 or 2020, then that they started that the US negotiation started with the Taliban back in Doha, and they ignored the Afghan government. So they somehow, recognized the Taliban and gave them legitimacy that, okay, this is no more a terrorist group, and we have to deal with this group. Ignore all those bloodshed, all those civilian blood that were shed by this group. in Afghanistan, and every day they conduct, deadly attacks in Afghanistan or across Afghanistan. So they started, ignoring all these atrocities or these war crimes and started negotiating with the Taliban. They did so. They ignored the Afghan government. They ignored all those people. They ignored even the people of Afghanistan because, months after the negotiation started between the United States and the Taliban, we, the people of Afghanistan, didn't know what shared, didn't know what issues were talked or discussed in the negotiation, and didn't know what decisions were made in Doha of Qatar. So following of the first and the second round of the negotiation, then they started to involve Afghan government as well. Afghan government formed a committee or a group of negotiators that were involved. Everyone from different parties were involved, and they started negotiation with the Taliban as well. They did it for a few weeks, but unfortunately, they could not, continue their negotiation because they said that they are not, they cannot agree on the very basic things like, on the rules of how they should continue their negotiation, on other aspects. So the negotiation that the Taliban groups had with the Afghan negotiators, it was, just about basic things, and they never actually discussed the very important and key issues about the future of Afghanistan, about how they want to have and how they want to form a government if they are not agree, and if they don't agree, and if they don't accept the current government. So everything starts from there. Then in another one, United States announced that they're gonna pull out of Afghanistan, and even after a few months, they announced the exact date. So by the time that practically they started to withdrawing from Afghanistan, everything started from that time. Taliban started increase their attacks, increase their violence, and they started attacking, as I said before, attacking major capital cities. They were enough successful, and they could even fill or collapse some of the provincial capitals as well. The armies somehow started losing morals. The key players that they somehow knew that when the United States in Afghanistan, it was somehow guaranteed that Afghanistan will not collapse. But those key players inside Afghanistan, they also, as they were sidelined by the President Ashraf Ghani and the Afghan government, they also somehow lost their hope and lost their morals. The people of Afghanistan started losing their morals, specifically every day that the United States, other Western governments or Western embassies issuing statements that, for example, Taliban are going to, or ISIS are going to attack this part of Afghanistan. So they were asking their staff not to go there or prevent to go there, or they even asked their citizens to come out of Afghanistan or to leave Afghanistan because everything will be deteriorated. So all these messages, negative messages, impacted Afghan people, impacted the government, impacted the army. This is another question, that if there was any willing in the leadership of Afghan government or not, but in the lower part, like among the army, among the people. So these messages, when they face themselves with these messages, and from the other side, when they witness that the Taliban increase their attack, they can make it to to collapse a provincial capital, and then they even collapse the whole province. And every day that they got up from the sleep, and they witnessed that, okay, another province fell to Taliban, and they have attacked another province. They have killed so many people. Every day they started to receive negative news. They received negative news, and they witnessed the collapse of a new province, the collapse of a new major provincial capital. So their lives filled with these sort of news, and their lives filled with so many negative news about an imminent collapse of the whole Afghanistan. So I think by the time that the United States Army left Afghanistan, about 90% of Afghanistan already fell to Taliban, and there were only a few major cities like Kabul, MazarSharif, and Herat city that in two of them there was fighting. There was fighting underway, and only you had Kabul that there wasn't any fighting at all. So I can say that the day that the United States entered negotiation or started negotiation with the Taliban, and then they announced the date, the exact date of the withdrawal. Everything starts from here, though we cannot blame the United States and the other Western countries that, okay, we cannot stay in Afghanistan forever. Yeah, that was right, but I think it wasn't the right moment to leave Afghanistan. It wasn't the right moment to leave the Afghan government alone while they witnessed that Taliban every day gaining ground. Every day they collapse a province, they collapse a provincial capital, and they are very, coming close to Kabul. And by having or taking over of Kabul, nothing will remain. So it means that the whole country, the whole government that they invested in the past 20 years will be shattered by another Taliban takeover, which such a thing happened actually in Afghanistan. But I think there was a deal made back in Qatar when the negotiation started back a few years ago, and then this deal, somehow they discussed the process in the other rounds of discussion as well that we still don't know. But I think there was a deal because when the Taliban attacked every province, there wasn't any fighting at all. So without fighting, while, for example, I can share a very an example about this one. In Kunduz city, we have a military corps that almost has around 30,000 personnel soldiers. It is one of the most equipped corps in the north of Afghanistan, which was in charge of securing so many provinces in the north of Afghanistan, including MazarSharif. But the day that the military corps fell to Taliban, they couldn't even resist for a few hours. Fighting for days is something else. They couldn't even resist for a few hours. So when we talked with the officials, they said that there wasn't any fighting at all. That we bring in the issue of resistance. When the Taliban attacked, they were a few of Taliban soldiers. They attacked. They came to the cities, and then they spread the rumors that, okay, Taliban decide to attack Kunduz city, and then decide to attack the military corps. So then some of their fighters, started shooting in the air, started attacking some local police checkpoints around the Kunduz city, and like this, all those local officials who were in the Kunduz city, they went to the military corps and they left Kunduz by using the helicopters and the other stuff, the other ways that they had. And when all the officials left, so there wasn't any moral at all. By leaving all the local officials, the moral of fighters automatically, vanish and automatically destroy. So that is why, without that, the Taliban, fight Afghan army, they somehow, they could make it to take over all the provinces, the provincial capitals. So this scenario somehow, happened in all parts of Afghanistan. As I said, in Kabul, when Taliban entered Kabul, there wasn't any fighting. There wasn't even a single bullet to shoot. So they could capture Kabul, while we expected, we expected that if they attack Kabul, at least Kabul may resist for a week. But nothing happened. Nothing happened, and they couldn't resist. So we know that there was a sort of deal. Maybe one of our friends call it an evil deal that happens in the back doors. But what sort of deal, and between who, between which countries, we don't know that yet. But there was some deal, and of course, the day that the United States announced that they're gonna withdraw from Afghanistan, and when they practically started withdrawing of Afghanistan, which I said it was not in the right moment, it had a huge impact And it was one of the main reasons behind why Afghanistan collapsed and fell to Taliban once again.
All right. Any more questions? Otherwise, we will pose our own. All right. Okay, Mr. Hassani, I wanted to ask, like, do you think the resurgence was something which was inevitable, or do you think it was something which could have been prevented somehow?
Sorry, could you repeat your question? I couldn't hear that clearly.
Do you think that the resurgence was something which was inevitable?
Well, I think it was inevitable because, you know, during the past 20 years, we built an army, we built our intelligence forces, we built our police, and they were enough capable to fight the Taliban. If not, you know, alone, but at least with the little support of another country, they could fight the Taliban. And this scenario that we witnessed was, you know, the scenario that, you know, in a very bad case, in a very unoptimistic way, it wasn't, you know, this scenario should not happen, and it could be prevented, you know, if the army could fight the Taliban, if our police could fight the Taliban, and if the intelligence agency of Afghanistan could fight, and if there wasn't any betrayal. So I think there was betrayal, I think there was a deal, and all these things, all the deal and the betrayal and the, you know, maybe the agenda, the evil agenda that the leadership had, you know, happened to this, that right now we are seeing Afghanistan fall so quickly and without fighting to the Taliban. You know, there was some statistic that the, you know, Afghan army was around or more than 300 personnel. So if you compare this to the Taliban could not make it to the 100,000. So how, you know, 300,000 soldiers could lose the game to 100,000 fighters? So, you know, mathematically, it's not possible. So, of course, there should be something else. There should be some deal. And without that deal, I think Afghanistan would resist, and we would be still in Afghanistan. And Afghan people would have their normal lives as they had in the past months and years. So it was inevitable, but it was inevitable, but I don't know. Maybe it's because of the deal, which we don't know the details yet, and we have to wait and find out.
Mr. Hassani, can you also talk about the restrictions that the people in Afghanistan are facing right now? Because I heard that they're even not allowed to listen to music in the street, so music is banned. They're not allowed to wear jeans. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, most of the new restrictions imposed by the Taliban targeting the women of Afghanistan, though men are also facing with some restrictions. You know, the day that the Taliban entered Kabul, they somehow wanted to form or to create a sort of positive image of themselves by saying that we are not the Taliban that we were in 1990s. We have been changed, and we now believe in democracy. We now believe in the rights of minorities, in the rights of women. But as they entered Kabul, as they took over of the power, and they started their own caretakers government, we witnessed that now girls aren't allowed to go to school. There have been some segregations in the universities that they have resumed their status between female students and male students. We saw pictures, and some that I talked with some university officials. They confirmed that we have segregated the students because of the pressure, Taliban pressures. So in some areas, men are not allowed to wear jeans and t-shirts. They have to wear those Afghani traditional clothes, which we call that pirahan tumban. And yeah, women or people in Afghanistan are not allowed to listen to music. They are not allowed to go to the cinema. They are not allowed to, you know, women are not allowed to get out without mahram or a male accompanier. And these are the information that we have, shared by people in the big cities like Kabul and Herat. So still, we don't know what happens. Even I think worse things are happening in rural areas, like in provinces that people cannot connect, or they are not in touch with journalists, the people who are outside of Afghanistan. So that's why we haven't heard their voices yet. But these are the information and the details that shared by people who are living in Kabul, in Herat, or in MazarSharif and other big cities. But I have heard that there are even worse things are underway in rural areas. For example, I heard that Hazara people in Ghazni province of Afghanistan, the members of a whole family, which was around 11 people from the same family, were shot dead. They were killed by the Taliban for nothing. Hazara people in Daikundi, another province in the southern part of Afghanistan, they around hundreds of families are forced to leave their lands, to leave their houses, because the Taliban told them that these houses and these lands are not yours. You have to live here, and they have given them ultimatum. So the same scenario happened in MazarSharif as well. So they are, I think literally they are. They have an agenda, an agenda which is an ethnocentric agenda. We know that most of the majority of the 99% of Taliban are from the Pashtun ethnic of Afghanistan. So they are trying to clear the government, to clear other major and strategic parts from the other minorities and from the other ethnicities. So that's why they have started, facing with Hazaras. They have threatened them to leave their houses and their lands that they lived for years, for decades, and for even for more than a century. But now they come and say that this is not your lands, and you have to leave your houses, your lands, and you have to go away, as King Abdulrahman Rahman Khan did it in century 19. So if we come back to the restrictions, women, for example, they have to have a hijab, if not like burqa, but they have to have chadri, the hijab, and women cannot protest. Though we have witnessed some protests in Kabul city, in Herat city, and other parts of Afghanistan, but they have been faced and they have been dealt with violence. Some of them killed, some of them kidnapped, some of them detained, some of them tortured. Even the journalists who were on the ground, and they decided to, and actually they tried to cover the protest. They have been also detained. They have been warned. They have been threatened. Some of them they have been even tortured. And but the more, these are some of the restrictions that shared with us. But a few days ago, I talked with my fellow journalists who are receiving Kabul. I told them, I asked them that, okay, how is the situation like for you right now? Can you still work as you were used to work in previous months, in the past months, as we had another government, a republic government? And they told me, no, we are totally in control of the Taliban. They are, the Taliban is the one that tell us what we should cover and what we shouldn't. So they have put also some restrictions for the journalists as well. For example, local journalists, honestly, local journalists are not, able to cover any any story or any incidents, because they will definitely face with punishment, with consequences. Only they are all international journalists who came to Afghanistan, who recently came to Afghanistan, and they have a privilege of having or holding another passport, that anytime that they want, they can leave the country. But in terms of Afghan journalists, they cannot. So that's why those who could leave the country, they're already dead, and those who are still in Afghanistan, they are facing with some restrictions. For example, they told me that the Taliban warned them of covering women protests or any sort of protest which is against the Taliban group and against their Islamic Emirates. So they also told me that they are not allowed to cover or have stories about the resistance groups or resistance fronts, whether they are in Panjshir or other parts of Afghanistan. If you do any story, you will face the consequences. In order to be able to cover some parts of the cities, you have, beside that you have your journalism ID, you should have another letter from Zabiullah Mujahid, which is the official spokesperson of the Taliban. He will also issue another letter, which they call it, Porzagag in Dari. They call it Porzagag. You have to have that Porzagag as well if you want to cover some places. But one of my friends, even he had his journalism ID plus that Porzagag, that letter from Zabiullah Mujahid a few weeks ago. He faced with the Taliban. While he was interviewing a woman about the current situation, about how the regime change impacted her life and her family life. A Taliban fighter approached him and started beating him, started torturing him. And when he asked why, about the reason, we told him that you're not allowed to interview or talk with a woman which is not your sister, your mother, or your wife, and which is not familiar to you. So you shouldn't. It's forbidden under their Islamic law. So these are the restrictions. Taliban have put forward so many restrictions, but these are the few of them that shared with us. But I can say, yeah, still in rural areas there are more restrictions. We have heard some rumors, different rumors from the people that we talk with them, but it is not confirmed. For example, they say that the Taliban fighters are also detaining and kidnapping the youths, the boys, when they see them that they are sitting in front of doors or in front of shops. They take them away and no one knows where they take them. For example, during the night, they go to the houses because they have the intelligence, they have the reports, and they have the details. All those people who reported or spoke about or against the Taliban in the past years, now they are there and they're somehow they are asking for what they did in the past. During the night, they go to their homes and take them away, take them with themselves. They torture them. Some of them have been killed by the Taliban, and some of them still we don't know about the fate of them. That what happened since that night that they came to their houses and they got him away, or they took him away from their houses. So these are the restrictions. I think there might be more even. But the people of Afghanistan are unfortunately going through some difficult times. The unemployment, just skyrocketed, and everyone is jobless, unemployed, and they don't have any money to keep living in Afghanistan. There isn't any job at all. There isn't any government at all. And the Taliban says that, okay, you have security. It's right. It's all right that you don't have the work, the job, or you don't have a way of income. But unfortunately, in the past weeks, we witnessed that even we don't have that security as well. For example, we have been witnessed 3 back-to-back explosions targeted mosques. First of all, it happens in Kabul, then in Kunduz city, and the last Friday, while the Shiite people in Kandahar city gathered in a mosque in western of Afghanistan, they were targeted by 2 suicide bombers, and more than 100 people killed and wounded in this attack.
All right, so unfortunately we need to close a bit earlier, but before that, one more question from Olivia, please, and then we close the event.
My question was kind of 2 questions. Do you believe that that major global powers will begin to engage in further relations with the Taliban if the legitimate government remains deposed? And if so, or if not, what do you think that means for Afghan people?
Well, right now, by what we are seeing on the ground, it looks like that the regional power, the regional countries, and even the international countries are not willing to, fight the Taliban, despite what they are seeing and what they are witnessing. For example, what happens in Afghanistan. So right now, they are not willing to fight the Taliban. I think they are somehow waiting for the Taliban to see if they are capable of forming a new government, and if they can at least, fulfill some of the wishes of the international community or the regional powers, like if they can respect some of the rights of the women, some of the rights of minorities, some of the rights of other ethnic groups in Afghanistan. So right now, I think both the regional countries and the international community are just waiting for the Taliban to act. And then based on the Taliban's policy, on the Taliban's agenda and action, they may make another decision whether to to legitimize Taliban or whether they should support another resistance fronts that will be emerging in Afghanistan, or still there are some that fighting Taliban, though they are actually sticking to guerrilla fightings rather than fighting in the front lines because they don't have any ground, so they stick to guerrilla fightings. So this is what happens. I think in Afghanistan, the international community is waiting for the Taliban to see whether they can, fulfill their wishes, some of their wishes or not. And for the Afghan people, I think they cannot get along with the Taliban. I can give you an example. The new generation of Afghanistan, they were born and they raised at the time that there was some relatively democracy, freedom, women rights. Back in Afghanistan, I used to catch up with my female and male friends at the cafes in Kabul. But right now, under a Taliban regime, you're not allowed to sit with your female friends as well. You're not allowed to have that sort of gatherings. So I think these are the rights, these are the things, the new lifestyle that the new generation got used to that, and they cannot get along with the new rule, with the new medieval rules like the Talibans, to say goodbye to all these, all these achievements, whether to say all these rights that they got used to that, and they abruptly or shortly they start living under another regime which tell you how you should live, how you should wear, what you should do and what you shouldn't. And definitely, if you are believer or non-believer, you should go to the mosque, do prayers, and the woman, whether you believe in Islam or whether you don't, you have to cover your head and you have to have a job. I think for the majority of Afghan people, which the majority of Afghan population is the youth population and the new generation, it is unacceptable to get along with the Taliban. It is unacceptable to live under another rule of the Taliban, because once we have experienced that, despite that the Taliban says that we have changed and that they have changed, but we haven't witnessed that yet, and we are seeing that still they are following the same steps and the same rules that in 1990s they applied on Afghanistan, they imposed on Afghan people. But the difference is a little bit, obvious, because the older generation, which is my parents, they were somehow disconnected from the war when the Taliban first came to power and they controlled Afghanistan. But they cannot do the same thing and they cannot apply the same rule on us, because in the past 20 years, we have been, in contact with the new world, with the world, and we have been, we had democracy, we had, we tested some new freedom, some new values, and it's almost impossible for us to say goodbye to all these values just in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks. So it is, it is about time. I don't know if time can heal this wound, if time can force the new generation, okay, you should get along with the Taliban, this is the reality, which I think, and I see this very impossible. But if, in my opinion, it's almost impossible for the people of Afghanistan to get along with the Taliban and accept another medieval ruling of the Taliban regime. This is definitely, a big no for the generation, for Afghan people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hassani, for all the valuable information and insights and experience that you were willing to share with us today. It was extremely helpful and educating. I think we all learned something new today, and thank you a lot for joining. We wish you and your family all the best and best of luck. And apart from that, I hope you enjoyed the meeting as well. We wish you a lovely rest of the weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Alexander, Olivia, and Anna for having me. It was a great discussion with you guys, and it's a pleasure for me as well to meeting you, and hope one day we could meet in person as well. And I hope that the details and the information I shared with you and with other participants, you all found it helpful. And thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Oh, and wait, before everybody goes, if anybody wants to follow Mr. Hassani's social media, you can follow it here. You can follow his Twitter, where he gives you regular updates on what's going on back in his home country.
Yeah, thank you all for joining today. I hope you enjoyed the event as much as we did. And we are appreciating any kind of feedback you have for us. And have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.